meeting to order.
Microphones are on.
Yes, and
We have quiet in the gallery.
Sarah, I have not received any other business items in advance of this
then
meeting.
I talked directly to my daughter-in-law.
Up until October, November.
Talked directly to my daughter-in-law.
I want a gavel.
Thank you.
That's fine.
Where's that gavel they made me at the
It looks very empty
3D
and
printer at the library?
Yeah. If he starts clicking glasses,
The chair.
We have not received any other business items in advance of this meeting.
Okay.
Move on to item 1. Item 1 is the minutes of the council and committee meeting held on Monday, June 12th. Recommendation to approve.
Okay. So moved. Moved by Councillor O'Neill, second by Councillor Towner. Any discussion? All in favor? That's carried. Pass unanimous.
Item 2 is the 2017 first trimester report with introductory comments by the Deputy City Manager. The report is before you for information.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Dumont.
Through the chair, overall we're making good progress on the business plan priorities,
Move your seat.
including a number of high-profile projects. The report outlines the progress made on the business plan priorities to date. Also included in the trimester report is the financial variance report. And right now we're tracking for a small surplus at the end of 2017. Construction activities a little bit lower than last year, but only slightly below the 5-year median for construction. The values do tend to fluctuate from trimester to trimester based on when big projects get issued permits, so it will go up and down somewhat. What else we're noticing this trimester, though, is single-family permits are down, and I think that's a function of the high cost of land and the overall high cost of housing. I think the trend is more towards townhouses and condominiums right now. City staff vacancies for the first trimester was 5.5%, which I would say is in the normal range. We typically try to strive for about a 5% vacancy rate, so we're right in the ballpark right now. And overall, I would characterize the first trimester as being positive. We're continuing to see strong growth in Coquitlam, so it's it's a busy time, and there's lots being accomplished, and we continue to see the growth going on through the rest of 2017. And with that, we're open to questions.
Okay, I've got Councillor Reid, followed by Councillor O'Neill.
Okay, I've got 3
Great.
different ones. So on page 3, when you're talking about the fact that there will be a very small surplus in the city's general fund, et cetera, and I know you detail it a bit more, but from this paragraph, I assume that you're just taking out the unbudgeted expenditures that we could have no way of knowing about, the trees, the snow, and all that stuff. I hope that we will see all the surplus at some point. I want to see a report on what the gross surplus was and then less those things. Will that be reported that way in the financial?
Through the chair, there will be a detailed financial summary at the end of the year. Right now, we're just basically extrapolating out to the end of the year based on our first trimester experience. So right now, we're showing a small surplus. If I had to guess, I would say it'll probably be a little bit larger than what we're estimating right now, because that's typically what happens. But
so for me, a surplus is important. I want to know how well we're budgeting, and we always pretty well budget right down to the 1%, 1.5%. So that's good. So, and I realize we have all these unexpected things, but I want to see what the gross was, and then see something telling me what you've taken off. Secondly, on the development and construction chart here, talk about demolitions. And Pete and I have talked about this before, but have we got the soil permit fees in place now for all the excavations and demolition materials that we're taking out of our city? And I'm asking this because I'm very concerned about the fact that we are in a period of taking stuff down, ripping it out, and I want to make sure that our roads are going to be paid for by those very trucks that are hauling this stuff out. Can I ask about that, please?
Jim, I remember discussing this with you, and it wasn't a report recently.
Yeah, it was, and I can't remember what it said, and I'm sorry. I know we upped the soil removal permit fees, but I don't know how we dealt with this, and I really think we need to get on with this, because we've got some big stuff coming down.
Through the chair, in response, it's true the fees that engineering collects for the removal, now the placement of materials in the sand and gravel pits, that's been put in place and increased. I know that through that discussion, the question came up whether that should also then apply to construction sites and the excavation thereof. And it was addressed in a recent report where we talked about the excavation permit process, and in that there was a brief discussion about the pros and cons of that approach, and in the end the staff recommendation was not to proceed with that, but it was there for council's information. So at this point, no, we're not collecting from construction sites per se, but what we have done is there's fees, or separate fees above and beyond for excavation, fees above and beyond for foundation permit, and then the usual fairly substantial fees we collect at building permits. So there is a stream of revenue coming to the city at each stage in that process.
I wonder if I could have that article distributed back to me. Maybe other councillors are interested, but I foresee in the next few years that we're going to start having bigger buildings, perhaps along the Barnett, coming down. We're going to have some substantial weight on our roads from some of these old buildings, and I really want to take a good look at this and get something in place before it actually happens then.
Okay, Pete?
Yeah, I mean, I recall the discussion in the report that Jim highlighted, and the thing that convinced me not to recommend it strongly at that time was when you compared the extra administration and the extra staff time that would go into collecting and measuring that, and when you compared it to the bonus density system that we're getting many times revenue from the bonus density system as we would from this. The biggest impact is those areas where you're really excavating a lot going down, which is the same buildings generally where you're getting bonus density. That's what convinced me as a city manager not to push it any further. And I had discussions with Jim at the time. We highlighted it in the report, and that we weren't going forward with it, but it would be appropriate to recirculate the report, so we can do that. So if council wants to rethink
some big
that,
buildings coming down.
if council wants to rethink that, we can always do that. But the order of magnitude of the funding and the extra administration cost that you take to administer it, we just didn't feel at this point that was the best way of collecting additional revenues from that perspective.
If I'm the only one interested, if I could just get a copy of the report back.
Mr. McIntyre?
Yes, thank you. Certainly, we will circulate the report. I'll flag those sections. But it is timely because we're getting to the point of our budget preparations around fees and that for this year. So as I said, we did set a fee for that excavation component, so we can have a second look at that. In terms of, I wouldn't want to go to a full-blown system such as what engineering has for the sand and gravel pits, because it is a pretty labor-intensive system. But I think we can look at that fee level for excavation permits, and maybe there's a little bit of upside there to help cover it.
I mean, we estimate a lot of stuff when it comes to doing that, so I mean, it's not too hard to, estimate a 10,000 square foot building with, a base fee of some. Okay, and my last question is, on the vacancy report, attachment 4, on both sides, so these are all the positions that we're dealing with in the city on the vacancy report, correct? This is it.
Through the chair, that's correct.
So something that concerns me is this mystifying person from police services, the crime analyst that we had to fight for, or they did, and we finally agreed to give them one, and now we've got 2 missing. And we don't have one over there, it doesn't look like. So I guess Sean's here, so I'm showing a shortlisting backfill on the crime analyst and a supervisor in the crime analysis. and both of those, one is backfilled and one is vacant. And I wondered how we got there, because I thought this was a really big item for the RCMP.
Superintendent? I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but you're here.
Well, I can speak generally to it. I agree it is important. Policing now is all intelligence-based policing, so you want to be doing your research of where the offenses are happening and how they're happening and things like that. So, but I don't know if Sean can speak to, it looks like the position shortlisted means we'd be fairly close to hiring, but Sean, do you have any specifics on that?
Those processes have been taken forever to fill.
Okay.
And so they're actually, I think I broke it. But two of the positions are filled right now, I think. So there's just one, and it's out now for an action. So it's kind of a long story to it, but the one person who was in a lower level competed for another one and had to recompete because we had to repost it, and it went back around, and he got the higher job. Now his job is open, and now there's another one that's vacant, so one of the other people that had the lower job competed for that one. It's kind of confusing, but...
Where do these folks come from? Through the Justice Institute, or are they RCMP?
No, some of them are analysts. Two people were assistant analysts in our office, and they were allowed to compete, but there was a process they had to follow. And the process took at least 6 months. It was probably longer.
Before you got here, I think there were 2 or 3 before you that kept asking for them. Finally, we get them, and then I look and see they're missing. Yeah.
So what happens is we have to follow a process that's put out of the division analyst shop, and they have this test that you have to write, and it's actually been a sore spot with everybody because a lot of people are going in and failing this test, and it backs the whole process up, and it caused a lot of angst for us. So we were backed up, I bet, 6 to 8, 9 months on this, and we've been.
So we're moving forward.
We're moving forward, and we've got the people in place, but we just got to go back through the processes all the time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And my last question is, when you backfill, do you backfill at the same salary as we would hire at?
Mr. Lamont.
It depends on, I guess, the position and how we're backfilling the position. So we wouldn't necessarily, but the likelihood is in most cases.
If we're trained
we were
first,
probably if they're trained and qualified, we would backfill at the salary.
Thank you very much. I'm done.
Okay, Councillor O'Neill and Councillor Wilson.
Thanks very much, and congratulations on a 14 happy face report here. Your business priorities update, and no neutral faces, no sad faces. That's great. So I don't have a lot of questions. I don't have any questions on some of the broader things, but reading through both the initial report and then looking at the attachments, all sorts of little questions came up about the status of some things, and I'm just going to go. So I think that probably the general managers will be the ones that will have to answer this. The first one was on page 3 of the initial report about the engineering, the public works variance, the additional road repairs. We all thought of and heard about and saw and experienced the potholes, but I've noticed something this year and I wonder about the cost and the plan to repair or repaint all the lines that seem to got worn out more this winter than ever before. And there's some areas where you virtually can't see any lines anymore, just north of Coquitlam Centre, things like that. Is that on your work plan? And overall, what's this going to cost us? Do we know yet for not only completing the potholes but also repainting all the lines?
Through the chair, what I can offer you is, as you know, we had a very severe winter, and also during the winter conditions, we faced some additional challenges in the form of the salt supply, Metro Vancouver-wide. So we needed to do what usually we don't want to do, and that is towards the end of the season, for the last month and a half at least, we actually used a mixture of sand and salt to combat ice and snowy conditions. And the unfortunate after impact of using sand is additional wear on the roadways, mostly in the form of the road painted lines are disappearing. So this is the situation what we face now, and equally we had much more than our normal share of potholes citywide. Now, we also know that the winter was longer than usual, and the spring season, even to date, has been very rainy, and that impedes our opportunities to properly fill potholes, never mind trying to do road line painting. I don't have at this point a cost figure how much more we will be spending on pothole filling, but probably in the vicinity of 3 times as much than in an average year. And for the line painting, not as much more, but we will likely spend more than in prior years, because not all roadways need repainting, and we have an annual program to repaint certain lines. So now that the weather is better, although we'll be competing with other municipalities, we are hopeful that within a reasonable time frame, under better weather conditions, we can get the job done.
Well, that's good. I was thinking that the missing paint poses at least as much, probably even more of a safety hazard than the potholes, so it's something to stay on top of quickly. I'm glad that you're aware of it and have it in your work schedule. That's good. Next one, this might be for the strategic initiatives General Manager. It's page 5 under commercial, and that led me to think about the corner of the city center library that was staffed with Evergreen Line people, and but when that project was supposed to wrap up, it's going to be vacant again, and we're going to try once more to maybe see get a commercial tenant in there, coffee shop or something like that. Who's on top of that project? Andrea might not even know about it.
Sorry, Andrea Toma, Strategic Initiatives. I don't see that here as a SI taking lead. I do know, I have been made aware that we are looking to see how we can best use the space and allocate it. I will have a chance to talk maybe with our business development folks to see what we can do. I know that there's no plans in the short term, but that is something that we're looking into once we get our vacancies filled, and we're looking at our how we best manage our lands and facilities that the city owns.
So,
Mr. Steffen?
In addition to that, just before Andrea joined us, I did have a discussion with Perry generically over whether or not he thought the demand curve had changed at all. Because if you recall, the last time we went out for coffee shop, we had no takers. Right? There was no, and we felt we should defer until the Evergreen Line was open. The Evergreen Line was open, so I did have that discussion with Perry at that time. He felt that the demand had not increased sufficiently, and he still would not get a suitable coffee shop tenant in that location yet, and so he felt it was premature. But we are thinking about that, and we're trying to think about what the best way to use that space is.
So right now that space is empty?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
How big is it?
It housed 4 or 5 staff plus an office.
1,200 square feet.
And we looked at utilizing part of it when we were talking about housing the Strategic Initiatives Group, and it was felt that we should bring them together. And as Council recalled, they have moved over to the Innovation Center on a temporary basis, and that is sufficient for their needs on a temporary basis. But there's always other kind of needs, and we're in the process of evaluating that. We're also in the process of looking at other more long-term solution over the next year and a half or so, so that we have a place to solidify the staff needs. And we're in that process right now in terms of looking at all that. And we felt it was premature to release the coffee shop area of the library until that review had been done. But we will be doing that review shortly.
Okay. It'll be one of the rare doors on the east side of Pine Tree that actually opens onto Pine Tree, from all the way from Barnett Lougheed to Guilford here. There's hardly anything that actually opens onto Pine Tree. So I'd like to see that activated somehow. So I'm glad it's on your scope anyway. I want to get that one. No, we don't need to ask that one. I think we're over to police again. So on the business plan priorities update, under strategic goal number 2, number 5, Evergreen Line, policing strategies for Evergreen Line. And we're looking forward to a council report on impacts and next steps scheduled for T2. So it's just any time now. Now, what I wanted to know is this being done just by our department, or are you liaising with the transit police as well, working with them? And can you tell us about what the transit police have done as well in the last little while? I know they have plans to add more officers in the near future. So I'm just curious about your relationship with the transit police, and will this strategy dovetail with what they're doing?
So we did have a presentation on July 10th that I'll be doing for you. Kind of outline all that for you.
July 10th, okay.
Yeah, and actually it was just finished today, so.
Oh.
So you're kind of stealing my thunder here.
Well,
we'll wait. We'll wait
Okay,
patiently.
so is it going to be a public report, or is that
be closed and closed.
Okay, so what can you tell publicly, tell us publicly, because it's a question that comes up now and again from the public.
We are working with transit police. We've had a couple of committees that since before it opened, in advance of the SkyTrain, that we've had going. A high-level committee with managers and a lower level with the boots on the street, so to speak. And our analysts have also been working together, analyzing all the data and stuff from SkyTrain. We've been sharing stuff back and forth, so you'll see a little bit more of that coming out on the July 10th report. But we'll have some graphs and stuff to show you.
Okay.
But yeah.
Thank you very much. Our last two questions are for Parks, Rec, and Culture. So we're now on the strategic goal number 3, number 9 of the business plan priorities update. First one is top of the page, third item, Westfield 9D Park site. I see that the Parks, Rec, and Culture web page is now calling that park Burke Mountain Pioneer Park. Is that the settled final name for that park?
Yes, through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, good, thank you. People wanted to know, and I know when it left the committee, there was just a bit of uncertainty there, but it looked like that's what it's going to be, and you're now calling it that, so it's cool. Okay, Mountain Pioneer Park it is. And third from the bottom of that page is Coquitlam Crunch. You say public engagement is planned for T2. That would be, so I think that's already happened, because I saw a lot of people taking notes and everything and doing surveys at the Crunch. And so I just wanted to make sure that was what's already happened. And it's so this is all wrapped up, all the engagement is wrapped up. Is the online engagement wrapped up for Coquitlam Crunch too?
Yes, the engagement, I believe online, it may be still open, but it's closed. I know the
We're
on-site.
getting a negative
Okay, great.
back there.
Sometimes these things turn over. But yes, we've done the engagement on the Crunch. We've had an incredible amount of feedback. All of that will be discussed with Council as part of our next phase of the work that we're going to be doing there. And it's quite a positive response from the community. So Council will get a report.
There were some questions being asked by the in-person takers, talking about doubling the Crunch, things like that, stuff that I'd never heard of before.
Yes.
So it'll be really interesting to see what people think. But one of the things that wasn't asked, and that the guy taking my, who I was chatting with, didn't know about the planned extension of the Crunch further higher up, and so general public didn't seem to be aware of that, and the guy taking the survey wasn't aware of Fortis's plan to build. Is that an omission by purpose, or is that on purpose, or was that?
Through the chair, there's multiple phases of this long-term project and the future of this amenity. First of all, there is some infrastructure work that's going to be happening as well. There's some piping that has to be put in there, so working with engineering on some of the early works. Ultimately, we do want to expand the capacity of the Crunch, and twinning it is one of the options, as well as adding amenities. Certainly, we're finding parking lots, bathrooms, things like that are going to be needed. There is a long-term expansion of the Crunch all the way up to Eagle Mountain, and part of that is, as council knows, a proposal for funding through Fortis. There's also the Crunch on the other side of Barnett, and we're looking at that as well as part of our longer-term strategy. Ultimately, so residents could find a way from Mundy Park all the way to Eagle Mountain. That's been an incredible amenity. It would require some additional infrastructure crossing the Barnett, and how to do that. But there's multiple phases. You'll see some work on the first phase very soon. That is the kind of the current plan for some additional amenities and twinning, and then there'll be additional work in the next year or two.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much. That's all my questions.
Hey, Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor Tanner.
In terms of the road lines that Councillor O'Neill had brought up, I remember reading an article, I think it was the Vancouver Sun a month or two ago, about a new formula approved for road painting, mainly for like the Coquitlam and stuff, where there's a lot more extreme weather, that the province has approved. So I don't know if we would be using that new formula of painting, but it was longer lasting, more reflective, and all that sort of thing. So hopefully you're on it. If it's not too expensive.
Diamonds.
In the business plan, there was talk about the affordable housing plan and projects brought to council, which was great. I just wanted to know how things have progressed with the new positions that we created in terms of going after some partnerships and that sort of thing.
Mr. McIntyre.
Great. Thanks, Misha. Through the chair, thank you. Well, we've, with the green light that council gave us on that, and proceeding with the recommended approach and the funding envelope, we have filled the position. It's the tandem team of Perry Sinisha and Bruce Irving, and I think this is a good lead-off combination. They have tremendous skills and experience, but in slightly different ways, so I think we get the best of both worlds with them. So it's up and running now, the program, where you'll see the first results on a number of fronts, actually. Bruce has been helping with the zoning bylaw review. That was one of the to-dos coming out of the housing affordability strategy, looking at some of the zoning bylaw standards and requirements around affordable housing, rental housing, and that. So we got some work will be coming forward to council on that the next couple of months. Bruce and now more so Perry will be very instrumental with the Coast Meridian project. We'll be reporting on that very soon as well. There's been a lot of behind the scenes work in getting that set and ready to come forward to council with a recommendation. Other things that more weekly and emerging issues, they're helping out in those areas. For example, with major development applications, our thinking is to get them plugged in earlier rather than at the late stage in approvals. So when the developers first come in and start talking about their projects, we can then discuss the opportunities for affordable housing component and how that might be leveraged. Other one that's very topical of late is the Hoy Creek Co-op. There's been a lot of media attention, and there's some various developments there. Some are encouraging, and so we're assisting on that as well with that team.
Well, I was going to ask about the Hoy Creek Co-op because it seemed to me that would have been a natural for them to be on right away, but from what it seemed like last week, it was didn't seem like they were involved. So I know Mayor Stewart made some calls and had some discussions, and I heard back from Ron McKinnon's office that he had met with the senior minister and the CMHC, and that was great. But so I just really would expect that they'd be pretty involved in that one as well, because it's so acute at the moment. Okay, that's good that they're going on that. I was trying to find, this is more for engineering, I was trying to find an email. I thought we received an email from somebody complaining about the recycling depot not being open on the Monday, holiday Monday, and I was assuming they were referring to the Victoria Day long weekend. Did we experience much garbage and recycling left at the gate because we weren't open on the holiday Monday? I didn't hear anything about that, but I thought this person might have had a good point.
Since the holiday Monday, we haven't become any extraordinary large quantities dumped at that location. But if you don't mind, I'd like to use this opportunity to highlight that the Coquitlam transfer station recycling depot is open 7 days a week. Currently, the town center recycling depot is open 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, and we are in the process of hiring an employee to staff the recycling depot in the town center. As you know, the position has been posted. It had to go through an evaluation process with Metro Vancouver. I anticipate that an attendant will be hired in the next 2 to 3 weeks or so. And then once the attendee is on site, we will do the physical changes that we outlined in our previous report to council. So we'll bring in additional containers, and we broaden the range of materials that can be dropped off at this recycling depot. And we will notify both yourselves as well as the public when we will change the opening hours. The new hours, once the attendee is in place, will be Wednesday through Sunday, including Sunday, 10 a.m. through 6 p.m. So the closure will be Mondays and Tuesdays. And we anticipate that with this change, we will further reduce the dumping, because in our experience, much of the dumping occurs during weekends when it was closed.
And if we experience an unusual amount of dumping on holiday Mondays, would we consider hiring an auxiliary staff person to be there on the Mondays, the long weekends?
We could, yes, certainly we will consider that. Alternatively, we will consider overtime.
Okay, great. And the last question is about the Park Blitz. And this actually might be for our city manager. We had talked before about a city park construction crew, and you'd mentioned that maybe the Park Blitz was a way to try to initiate that. So is most of the work being done on the Park Blitz being done by our city employees, or is much of it being contracted out? Or
Raul is handling the details of that. We're partway through that project, but I've not been briefed on the specifics.
The Park Blitz had funding through the chair to Councillor Wilson. It provided funding for a project coordinator in the city, it's a 3-year, as well as some additional resources for contract work. So it's mostly contracted out, but I can give you a bit more details through council, how much is being done in-house. But largely, it's still contracted work. However, the idea would be that with already some of that work happening in terms of the contract management, perhaps there's an opportunity to expand that. But we don't have a crew that actually physically does some of that work. We do work with SI, and some of the carpentry and some of the work is done through our crews, with very small amount that I understand, but I can get some details as to what percentage. We've done a couple already, so we should have data on that.
That's fine. We did have a discussion about, how the tenders were coming in way over what we expected, and how finding, suppliers was becoming more and more difficult, and we've discussed about potentially having a city parks construction crew for the simpler parks, and I thought the discussion was that the Park Blitz could be a way to kind of introduce that. So what I'm hearing is maybe we're not introducing it yet.
I'd like to hold that in abeyance until I can get a bit more data on the two projects we've done so far, Meadowbrook and Shiloh. There is some work that we do, but I also don't want to give the impression we're doing the entire range of work in some of these projects. There's some minimal work that we always do, but what I can do is bring a separate email through council or separate discussion at council on the percentages of work that we're doing versus what's being contracted out.
That'd be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good. Councillor Towner.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. 2017 is off to a great start. I have one comment on the vacancy report regarding planning and development staff. I'm aware that the market is really tight for staff in this area, both in the public and the private sector. And I took note that last year at this time there was 13 vacancies, and this year there's 8, and one's being interviewed and one's shortlisted. So I just wanted to acknowledge that considerable improvement in the vacancies in the planning and development area, and hope this trend continues. So that's that. The question I had on the development and construction activity, maybe it's always like this, but it jumped out at me, perhaps because we are in such a rental crisis, we need more rental in our city. So it jumped out at me that 87 suites were created and 68 single-family homes. So can I conclude that every single-family home added a suite and a bunch of existing family homes added suites? Is that a...
Probably good. That's a good
It just seems, is it normally more suites than houses? I just found this number.
Yes, it is, but not normally in the records.
Okay. Oh, yes. Okay, so people are registering them now, or I'm just curious on some insight into these numbers.
Sure. Through the chair, I think there's a combination of things coming into play here. I'd have to go back and check the exact numbers, but there's a number of things that are being reported. With new single-family construction, I think as the Deputy City Manager mentioned at the start, actually the numbers are off a little bit this year. I think we're seeing a tightening of supply in available lots in the northeast. Still activity apace in the southwest, but so the total number of single-family building permits being issued is down. But what we find is it's between 60 to 70% of single-family building permits, when they're issued, they also then apply for a basement finish for a secondary suite. Sometimes those that don't seek that permit right off the bat will be back within a year or very soon thereafter. So that would be a second component to that number. And then the third would be those existing houses that are out there. They're part of the housing stock. Either someone's discovered they do have a suite and they're just legitimizing it, or they are properly adding a suite to their building. So the numbers don't always line up. That 60-70%, that also fluctuates a bit. Some years we see higher, some years we see lower.
Okay, so it jumped out at me. It just seemed higher to me, which I guess is good news for people who rent. And
on that side, yes, that is encouraging. I think our better success, though, has been in purpose-built rental units, which we're tracking well over 1,000 there. So that's which obviously we want to continue supporting.
Yeah, thank you. That's all I had.
Okay. Any further questions? Oh, okay. I don't think it's been. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor Cirillo.
Thank you, Mr. McIntyre. I wanted to follow up on the purpose-built rentals conversation, and thank you, Mr. Stewart, for this report. That's wonderful. So is this the time for suggestions of reprioritization or additions of items to these business plan priorities?
Through the chair, that would be appropriate to do it at this time.
Okay, great. Well, I just wanted to share, talking about purpose-built rentals, I wanted to share, it's been an interesting couple of months around stories that I've heard around rentals and some of the shortfalls of non-purpose-built rentals. I know we talk a lot about putting condos into the market and having those condos rentable or secondary suites rentables, but what I realized over the last few months is they're not actually potentially stable housing for people. And some of you may have read the article this weekend about the mother of the 11-year-old that's trying to find housing. You'll see it all the time, people looking for housing, whether they have kids or not. So I just think the idea of purpose-built rental is really important, because basement suites and someone else's condo are not stable housing. So I just wanted to share some of the examples that have come up, and I'm talking about it today because I don't want to let it go for another 6 months or another year or another 2 months, but I wanted to let you know on the multiple suites in people's houses. So I've had 2 calls over the last month of people that took on a lease or a rental into a basement, only to find out once they had moved in that somebody else was also renting in the house. So there was 2 suites in the house. Now, on one of the situations, they didn't have the proper soundproofing or anything, so this person is now in a situation where they're in a home with 2 suite rental suites. They have no recourse. There's nowhere, they can't afford to be anywhere else, so here they are, stuck in that location. I also want to let you know, a mother with a child asked to increase her rent. She's paying $1,200 right now, asked if she could increase her rent. Of course, she's been there 2 years, doesn't want to leave. She went back and said, I can give you another $100 a month. The landlord said, I need $150. She doesn't have $150. Now they can go speak to, they have rights as tenants, but you're talking about people that don't necessarily want to lose the housing that they have. So I wanted to let you know that happened. But I also want to let you know, in another situation, a single person actually moved out of the Tri-Cities because their landlord came and said, we're raising your rent $200. Now again, they can go through the whole process of trying to fight the landlord, but these are the situations that are happening.
So, sorry, Councillor, so this is, there's
This
one
is
of
just
the
background information.
to which, I missed
So what
which.
I'm going to ask is that we reprioritize the housing choices review, which is a big priority at this point in time. And I know the housing choices review doesn't necessarily address stable purpose-built rental, but it kind of does if we are strating these housing choices.
Just quickly, you're in attachment 1.
I'm in attachment 1, page 9, yeah. And the other thing I wanted to ask of this committee today was to think about protecting the current purpose-built, because this is my other example. There are 2 purpose-built rental buildings in southwest Coquitlam, both of them advertising right now. I had a person that phoned for one of them, only to be told that they're not leasing for more than 6 months because those ones are coming down.
Yeah.
So again, even though it's purpose-built rental, it's not stable purpose-built rental. So yeah, I would like to suggest today that we prioritize housing choices review from B to A. But also if we could add some sort of component around protection and expansion of our purpose-built rental. And the other thing is the idea of the subsidized housing, the housing agreements for subsidized housing. We know what those are. With the Hoy Creek Co-op, we knew that they were approaching. I think it's an important thing that our staff start looking at those housing agreements that are coming forward and we be proactive in that area. So 3 things. 1, can we reprioritize housing choices review? 2, can we add protection and expansion of our purpose-built rental as a call-out? I realize it's part of housing affordability, but... And 3rd, if we could ask staff to get on top of or ahead of proactively on these subsidized housing agreements that are coming to term in the next few years.
Okay, so the reprioritization, I'll go to Mr. Stebbins. I see that. I think that's, because that's on here. The others are the introduction of either new sub-items or new items. So, Mr. Stebbins, I've got two.
Or, John, the only comment that I would have is that we really get into fundamental prioritization once a year. We can, at any time these reviews come up, council can adjust things, but when all I ask is that if you raise ones, you drop some as well, because as I said repeatedly, it's the differentiation between the priorities that really cause us to focus on what. Just so if I could have a quid pro quo, and we've done that before, when we raise certain things, we dropped other things. So that's the one comment I would make. The other 2 comments, they are subsets of the housing affordability strategy, which we spent many, many days discussing and debating and reaching a position on it. And I know Jim is going to be reporting back soon on a status update on that, and then there will be an opportunity at that to look where we're at with all the various subcomponents and consider adding more or not. And And that's probably a more appropriate place to add it when you have all the issues in front of you as opposed to without the back.
So
That's just a comment.
So if we're having that general discussion and we want to provide direction, is there an opportunity at that point to then place the priority? I think to Councillor Zarillo's concern is when is the appropriate time to get them on the priority order, and I appreciate it's probably better to have that in the wider discussion, but following that, is there an opportunity to then prioritize it?
This list before us today is a very broad list of priorities across the whole city, including all departments. Within each area, you have sub-prioritization exercises, and when we did the housing affordability strategy, we did do priorities within that strategy. So this is the very broad section as housing affordability is a certain category that's here. Within that, we had short-term items and we had A, B's, and C's. There was about 30 items in there, and there were A, B, C's in there. So I don't think in this very broad review, it's appropriate to dive into the micro detail of the small review. And I think that place is better than when you have an update on that specific aspect of the review. And then there will be opportunities to discuss whether or not you want to get into those aspects or not. Changing, for example, housing choices review from a B to an A now is an appropriate time to discuss that. I don't really think the housing affordability issue fits into that, because this housing choices review has more with respect to the zoning aspects of it and those kind of aspects. But changing these broad categories from B to A now is an appropriate time. All I would ask is you identify something else to drop.
Okay. I think that's good direction. And Councillor Zarillo, are you okay with having that discussion in the context of the overall?
I totally hear what Mr. Steplin's saying. I don't necessarily. I want to get it done today, but I'm not sure that this is the place for motions, right? But if I had the choice today, I would want to make a motion that the city staff work on protecting the current purpose-built rental and subsidized rentals that we have in the city until we have a plan in place for expansion.
Okay. So I'm going to suggest that that's probably out of the context of this discussion, and I'm not saying it's not a valid discussion, but I think we have to have that discussion, but not in the context of the priorities of what's before us. The question on the housing choices review and your request to move that from a B to an A, is that really, would that accomplish what you're wanting to go with? Because as Mr. Steblin mentioned, that's really the zoning aspect. And I'll go to Mr. McIntyre.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. Pleased to share good news for a change. We are working on the housing choices. There was discussion earlier in the year. Council will recall that. We realize it's a key interest. It actually has a number of policy implications for Southwest, so we are working on something, and we want to be before Council before the summer break on that. So I kind of see it as a B+. But if that's going to be advanced ahead of other work, then we need to start talking about other work falling aside. But I think right now we're on it, and you'll see something within the next number of weeks.
So to Councillor Zarello, the concern is that if we were to make that change, we might bump something down when this is about to come to us anyway. So,
which I totally understand, but I still think that it should be anything to do with housing right now should be an A priority, because every week that we let it go is every week someone else is potentially on the street.
And it's your priority to move that to and make the motion to move it to an A, and then we can have that discussion.
So are we making motions then in committee?
Or requests?
I would like to have everybody.
Well, then we're going to have a discussion about it, but it has to be put on the floor. Well, okay, we can put it on the floor and discuss it, or we can have that discussion now. Why don't we go through and have the discussion first?
Yeah.
Okay, I have Mayor Stewart, I have Councillor Asmunsen, Councillor Reid, and Councillor O'Neill.
Okay, and I'm fine with bumping up the housing choices, because I do see that as being one of the key potential successes as we move forward. The challenge, of course, is it's not rental housing. It's housing choices is primarily about ownership and trying to get it so that there are alternatives to the massive single-family home that has 2 or 3 suites in it, which are rental housing, notwithstanding that in most cases now, at least one of them, it seems, is not legal. I was in several open houses on the weekend again, and the basements were always the same. They were split down the middle, the legal suite and the almost identical unit that is capable of being locked off with a key from the rest of the house that is called the rec room, and with a wet bar and everything else that a suite would need other than a fridge. So I think that we know that a great many of our big houses are currently heading in that direction, and I think we need to offer the carrot to try to pull people into some other options related to redevelopment of single family at the RS1 side, but also some, perhaps even a stick. But that's not so much the Housing Choices Review as perhaps also a review of RS1, which isn't on this list at all. The protect rental, that's something that council hasn't, I don't know that we can add something to or change its priority, given that council hasn't debated. In fact, we've had long discussions about the realities associated with our existing rental stock. Our stock, almost all of our rental stock is 40 to 60 years old. It's at the end of its anticipated life for wood frame, and we've seen fires, and we've seen, thankfully, nothing as tragic as happens in other, has happened recently in other jurisdictions, but I hesitate to try to extend the life of some of these buildings. I've been in some of them that I believe have been extended too long and need to be replaced. The White Creek Co-op is, for example, one where demolition is finally taking place for some housing that really should have been demolished a decade and a half ago. It hasn't been used for a decade, other than by squatters, and undoubtedly those kinds of issues are an enormous part of this question. The challenge we're facing now is inherited by the decisions of other levels of government, well, levels of government generally, that resulted in the 80s and 90s and first decade of this millennium, the development of effectively no purpose-built rental housing. That means that we predictably, and we used to have lots of public policy arguments in the early 90s predicting that 15 years from now we'll have no 20-year-old rental housing. And right now we have no 20-year-old rental housing and 30-year-old rental housing. We have 40 and 60-year-old rental housing. And that means that when it's demolished, as has to happen at the end of its life, typically, partly because it's lower density than it needs to be, but also because it's not accessible in any way. There's lots of public policy reasons why the housing in certain parts of Coquitlam is at the end of its life and needs to be replaced. But when that happens, we end up with losing 60-year-old housing and getting brand new housing, and even if it's all rental and purpose-built rental, and therefore contributes to the rental pool, so all of that by way of saying that the broader question is, to what extent do we put in place structural barriers to the demolition of existing end-of-its-life rental housing? And that's not a question for putting it on a priority. That's a question for deciding to what extent we do it. And if council decides that we need to take action on one of those things, then it has to be prioritized, and that's the appropriate time to give it A, B, or C, not give it an A priority and then in a few months decide whether that's something we actually should be doing. So I won't be able to support that element of it, but I say if we can figure out what we're going to lower in priority, I'm fine with with the housing choices and the questions associated with that being moved up in priority.
Okay, I've got Councillor Asmussen and then Councillor Reid.
Well, I'm fine leading Housing Choice Review. We had a workshop on it. It's coming back to us before the summer break. That's T2, so we'll have it. We'll be dealing with it quite soon, and we'll be finding our actions on. That's more about more types of ownership, housing, and smaller housing, different types of coach housing, and stuff like that. So that's coming back to us. I don't see it. I think it's properly in the spot. It's been worked on. And I think as Mr. McIntyre, it's a B+. It's almost going to be finished, depending on what council decides when the report comes back to us at the end of T2, which should be before the summer break, correct? So Mr. McIntyre's not. So we're going to be getting that back. So and I think the A's where we are fine for what and the staff have been working on them at the beginning of the year. I think the time to reset the ABC strategy is not partway through the year, but when we get into the budget, prior to the budget approval, we have the business plan priorities set for the next year. I think that's the best time to do it because then the staff have their marching orders throughout that year. I think some of the stuff that was mentioned fits into our housing affordability strategy. I think we've had some very great success on increasing our rental stock. I think Mr. McIntyre mentioned we're up to 1,000 units of rental, and we're gaining on that. And the other issue about protecting the existing rental stock, I don't, the council hasn't come up with a debate on that, but my one concern is we would stifle the market, and we also recently had an application where taking down 100 units and replacing it with 200 units, we're doubling it. That would stifle that, and we wouldn't be able to do that. So I'm going to support just leaving it where it is, and because it's coming to us by the end of the year, it's going to be dealt with. So there's no use moving it up now.
Councillor Reid?
This whole issue is a free-for-all, and to listen to some of the things you were talking about, there are things that are certainly not within our jurisdiction. We don't control noisy landlords, and we don't protect against noise from one suite to the other. We have a rentalsman that the province put in place some time ago, and they're to do with raising rents and processes to do with raising rents. But I really do believe that whoever becomes the provincial government in the next little while needs to relook at all of those things, all of those rules and regulations as to how you affect renters as much as how much you can rent and what kind of rules that there can be so that people can't get kicked out when they don't want to pay, an exorbitant amount of rent for something that they've been living in for a long time, or just how they raise rents. These rules are very outdated and they don't suit the market that there is now. We don't have the jurisdiction to force people to rent forever. There's private property rights, and they can do some of these things. I guess we can say, oh, well, you won't be able to build for 10 years. I mean, we can do things like that, but they're delaying tactics, and they're not fair and they're not right. Most of this stuff is in the province's jurisdiction, and I think that what we should do is get a group of us together, maybe a representative from a lot of councils in the Lower Mainland, or Metro take it on, or somebody to work with the province and get some more equitable things. I think what we are doing is two things. One, we have some purpose-built rental buildings coming up, but twice I've asked, especially with the one that came up a while ago last year, and this person didn't want parking, and he didn't want this, and he didn't want that. He's always going to build a rental building. Everybody jumps all over him. And I said, well, are we going to have fair and equitable rents? Oh, no, I never said anything like that. Oh, yeah, I did. He talked about having reasonable rental for the area. But I can tell you, as soon as that building's up and ready to be rented, there'll be market or as high as he can get. It's the same as all the suites that are going in. It's no longer that you'd spend $500 or $800 on a basement suite. It's more like $1,500 or $1,800, and it's a piece of crap. And a lot of it that is illegal and not with us that we don't know about is also not fire safe, and we all know that too. So that's a real job. That's a long, long job, and I don't know how we're going to do it. So where I am, the housing choices when we started on it was a way. Because we can't force people to build it, but what we can do is sort of get people out of the big homes and into smaller spaces so that the big homes can be left for bigger families perhaps, or they can be divided into more housing choices. So what we're trying to do is, when you can't build more land, you have to use the land you've got for more space, and I think we're doing what we can do, and I don't know of anybody in the whole Lower Mainland who has, who can answer all of these questions, because if it were simple, we'd all be doing it. Unless we want to build a purposely built rental housing that the city owns and rent it out for folks and take all that responsibility, there's really not much we can do. And I think maybe we need a bit more subsidized housing. I think that's a pretty well a proven fact. But again, that's not the reality. So it's fine to sit here and say, oh, we're going to put everything aside and we're going to change all our things and we're going to do all this, but there's no outcome. There's no proper outcome. And these folks that are in one of the suites you were talking about, Benita, where there's 2 and 3 suites, there's only supposed to be 1. These people have to start paying up, because if they're going to be collecting $1,500 and $1,800, then I want $100 a day if those aren't legal suites. And with that money, maybe I can start doing something with it. I'm sort of stuck on this. I think we've got to move forward with the jurisdiction, within the jurisdiction that we have.
Okay. On the housing choices review, leave it as an A, as a B.
Leave it as it is, because we're already working on it.
Okay, good. Okay, I've got Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, picking up from that last point, given that Housing Choices Review, the options to be presented in T2 before our summer break, you could, my understanding, it could be AAA importance, and it wouldn't get here any sooner. It's at this stage of the game, we are going to have that in front of us within a matter of weeks, and we can make decisions on it then. So I don't see any, just to say we've done it, to do it. It's been a B priority. It's coming forward in good time, and it's going to be in front of us in good time. So I see no need to change that. If we were told it's B priority, we're not going to get to it this year, and we all know how important it is, then we could say, well, no, let's make an A priority and make sure we get it this year. But it's not the case. So it'd just be needless window dressing, and let's not go there. The idea to protect rental housing, to me, constitutes a very significant reopening of the housing affordability strategy that we have. Now, we are going to be getting an update on the housing affordability strategy. Did I hear that? Yes, early. So it would be, I think, quite improper to unilaterally say at this stage of the game something like, be it anything, it could protect rental or this or that, to say, let's just put that one in, would have a very major impact. We spent a lot of time and a lot of effort, a lot of discussions, closed door and in public, regarding the housing affordability strategy, which is an A priority, and continues to be implementation of that, and to put in protect all rental just on principle at this stage, I would be opposed to. But also in practice, the points that May raised about, and I think Councillor Asmussen and the Mayor raised about the impracticality of it, I think in terms of it standing in the way of other developments that 100 go down but 200 go up, about what indeed is our responsibility in terms of city government. There's a lot of federal and provincial responsibility in this area. I think we're doing a lot with with our tool that doesn't put too much burden on the taxpayer, because basically our major tool is giving them free density to build rental, and it seems to be working pretty well. So we can't put a glass lid. There's even a TV show, used to be anyway. The dome, the big dome over any community, and say it can't change. We are being affected by rising prices. There are people who will be priced out of this market, either rental or purchase, and they are going to be priced out of this market. If we go into a position where we say, well, we want to try to prevent that from happening, that's a lot of market intervention that makes me very uncomfortable.
Okay, Councillor, I think we're getting into a discussion on the affordable housing strategy again, and I think you said it's coming. Do we have a date, or if I missed it, if you said that, when it might be coming for Mr. McIntyre?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to clarify on that point. We have in our work program, we have a series of reports coming forward over the next number of months. Ones you'll see soon, very soon, is the housing choices. The other piece that we're working on is the zoning bylaw update or review with respect to affordable housing and rental housing, and that's something else. You probably won't see that till early in the fall. Coast Meridian report, that's coming forward as a standalone project with recommendations. Those are all actions that were coming out of the, I think it was a 10-item action list we put in place for implementation when the HAS was adopted a year ago in December. And we gave ourselves a 2-year interval to work on that. We gave you an interim update last December. And so the end of the 2-year period would be the end of this year, end of 2017. So that would be the opportunity then to report out on those action items. And at that time, I think it would be appropriate for council in that review to look at what else is in the HAS, what else may be on the table or in council's minds, and have a fuller discussion at that time and give us direction, which would then provide the basis for a work program going forward. And I'd probably be recommending again that we do it in a 2-year cycle, which gives us reasonable time to tackle and actually advance on those things. So the short answer to your question, right now we're planning to bring that report at year-end 2017.
That seems eminently sensible to me. Anything else would be precipitous in action, I think, and we have to make these decisions in the context of our entire existing policy, so I'm happy to do that. Thank you.
Okay, and I had myself there as well, and I'm in agreement. On terms of moving the housing choices review from a B to an A, if this were something that was a B priority that we weren't going to see for 6 months, I would bump it up to an A, and then look at what we have to take down. But if we're not going to move this by only a couple of weeks, I don't know that there's any point in having the discussion of what to bump. I mean, yes, you can say it's an A priority and maybe there's some significance to listing it as such, but in terms of the time frame, if it's not really going to speed it up, there's probably no point going the exercise of then trying to figure out which is going to get downgraded. So I'm happy leaving the housing choices review at a B. However, I think that Councillor Zarrell raises some really good points. I don't know that this is the place to discuss it because it opens up a broader discussion, and this is a discussion about the business plan priority. I don't know if there's any way of having this discussion sooner. It's not listed here as a priority that we could then change to move that forward, but I would be more comfortable if this were coming forward sooner than say at the end of the year. But given that it's not listed here as a priority, I don't know how we can move that other than that possibly for you to sense that there's a lot of discussion both in favor and concerns being raised that maybe that would warrant moving that the opportunity for that discussion a little sooner.
About?
The affordable rental strategy.
We don't have an affordable rental strategy.
Sorry, the affordable housing strategy. Sorry, and the portion of that which is the rental, which is the subset, because we're starting that discussion here right now, and it sort of falls under the affordable housing strategy, which is going to come back later in the fall. Maybe that's what Councillor Zarrell is trying to move the discussion forward without changing the priorities, is what I'm suggesting.
We're talking about housing choices.
I know.
Let's talk about this.
People are mixing up.
That's what I'm trying to say is that we
started discussion is on the affordable housing strategy, which we debated for 1.5 years before we arrived at a conclusion complete with priorities. That's what staff are working on. It took us a long time to get staffed up, even to make some progress on the existing 10 short-term priorities that we are actively working on. I do not believe, without very, very specific direction from council, we have the capacity at the present time to do anything further. You are going to get an update, as Jim said, at the end of the year. We're doing annual reviews, many subcategories, and that would be the appropriate time to consider debating and adding additional venues if you wish to do so.
And that's what I'm suggesting. I'm just wondering if that update, is there a potential to have that update and have that discussion sooner without changing priorities or doing anything. I agree. This is not the place to have that discussion. This is about the housing choices review, which is not really what we're talking about. Councillor Zarrella has introduced what I think is a new topic here, It's been suggested it really falls under the affordable housing strategy. We're going to have that discussion later in the year. Is there the potential to have that discussion earlier in the fall rather than later?
If you made a specific direction to change the focus on which Jim and his team are working on, they could perhaps bring it forward by a month. Not much more than that. But right now, I totally support the work program that they're working toward. It's logical. Yep. It's an annual review. It includes multiple priorities. And what my advice to you would be is to let the staff continue to work on the priorities that you've already deemed and instructed them to do, noting that each one of these things are measured in 3/4 of a year or a year in terms of real progress. You don't change fundamental direction on things like that by pulling something forward by 1 month or so.
Good.
You don't have the jurisdiction to change.
No, that's fine. Okay, I was just trying to wrap this up so that we don't continue on a discussion that sounds like it's better to be held in the fall. I'll get to Councillor Marsden, then Councillor Wilson, then Councillor Zarrillo.
So I'll just start very quickly with a question for Mr. Dumont on this report. This particular item that Councillor Zarrillo has brought up is under item 14, key plans and strategies. It's got a big, happy, smiley face, which by the definition would indicate that one or fewer of the items that are listed here are at risk of not getting finished. Okay. Otherwise, if it was more than one, it wouldn't have that big, happy, smiley face. So that tells me that we're on pace to achieve the goals that are laid out here within the time frame. Correct?
That's correct at the time of this report. Yep, we're anticipating carrying it out.
Has there been anything happened since the time of this report, which is the 30th of April, that would cause concern to think that maybe that's not the case still?
I'm not aware of anything in this, Jim.
I haven't heard anything in the dialogue. I just want to ask the question very clearly.
Through the chair, just scanning through the list of projects under 14 that fall into planning development. We are working on all of them right now, and as long as we can continue to focus on them in relative priority to our other work tasks, I'm confident we'll have them done by the end of the year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for that. So I think it has been said the Housing Choices is not a purpose-built rental. It's not part of it, so it doesn't quite be there. It's on track, so I'm not going to support making any changes there. I was going to echo Brent's comments with regards to the recent applications we've seen. 100 units coming down in one place with 200 replacing it. Another one that has received fourth reading at the corner of Clark and Como that'll see 200 and some rental units built where none existed prior, so that's great. To the concerns that Councillor Zarrillo noted, I mean, there absolutely is concerns within the rental market in terms of how some landlords choose to conduct themselves. Some landlords. And that's what the residential tenancy branch is for. Councillor Reid has nailed it. There absolutely needs to be some updates there. There needs to be some pieces reviewed with at the appropriate level of government, which is provincial, where they can look at the things they need to do more for tenants and more for landlords. Because there's some challenges in there when there is a problem tenant. So I think there's more that needs to be done there, and I would encourage whoever winds up forming government to take that on. As far as the affordable housing strategy is concerned, Mr. Sevlin's indicated it took a year and a half of debate to come up with some stuff. I think we should be very proud of the 10 action items that were identified because they are action items. And they're things that we've now put people in place to move forward with. We've seen applications. We're seeing purpose-built rentals coming forward. We can talk about that ad nauseum. But I think the important part here is that we now are putting people in place to take action on an issue. And I would be absolutely loath to go and pull people away from taking action to revisit planning and see whether or not these 10 items should be added an 11th, or should we revisit something. The time it will take to go through this and see the benefits, I think we are better served putting the manpower we've got in place on delivering as much as we possibly can for purpose-built rentals, for stuff within the housing affordability strategy, within that spectrum, and most importantly in there, in my mind, because we're going to see market rental. The economy has shifted where the numbers make sense for more market rental to be built. That's great. We need to make sure that our people are in place and working with the various agencies to provide that truly subsidized component as well. And say, let's make those introductions so we can see it's there. We've put the pieces in place in the framework that's there. I think we need to now use the manpower to do it. And I think then from there, it falls on all of us as residents to look at our communities and look at our neighborhoods, and when opportunities come forward for that general densification, to look and say, you know what, maybe we need to be more welcoming to it. I've had a conversation with folks at Metro and with Mayor Mike Clay with regards to a Metro Van housing project that's in Port Moody. It's on the street that I live on, and I've said to him, it is not dense enough. You've got the ability to put in greater density to provide subsidized housing. It's on my street. Get off the pot and build it, because that's what needs to be there. We've got a need for it. We need, as residents in a neighborhood, to say, build it. There's a need. Let's move forward. So I appreciate what Councillor Zoul is trying to achieve in raising the profile of this and move forward. I believe the work that our staff is doing is properly directed right now, and I think we can move forward with the priorities we've got in place. And I hope that as we move forward and as we see applications come forward, that our residents start to embrace the need for additional types of housing along the curve, along the spectrum, that become more affordable and that can have, in many cases, a purpose-built and or subsidized component to them. That's all I got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson, on the business plan priority update.
You're going to limit me, but nobody else.
I'm trying. I tried to wrap it up when I spoke.
I tried
you
to
guys
stay
want to
tight.
keep.
I tried to stay
want to
tight.
keep discussing.
Our only item on our committee, council and committee.
We were going to run it to 2 hours if we keep working.
So, very interesting discussion, and I agree with a lot of what's been said, except for the fact that we're not doing everything that we can do. There are decisions that we've made that limit what we can do, and I think as circumstances change, we need to look at our decisions that we made in the past and decide whether they were the right decisions or whether we should change some of those decisions. So,
on a point of information, what decisions were they?
I'm getting to it.
Oh, good. Okay. Sorry.
I was going to ask. So, in terms of the the housing choices, it's coming. So let's not worry about that. But I asked about our two consultants working on the going after affordable housing partnerships and that sort of thing, and I heard one of them is working on zoning issues. Well, that wasn't necessarily part of the deal, right? I thought it was going and really reaching out to these nonprofit organizations, to BC Housing, working with the developers to make sure that I'll give you some benefit of the doubt there. But we finally got on that. That's starting to happen. That's great, and I think that'll make a big difference. When we were talking about the housing affordability strategy, we did not want to consider inclusionary zoning, and I had to push and push and push till we finally included inclusionary zoning in the public consultation. The public overwhelmingly wanted inclusionary zoning, yet we decided not to pursue inclusionary zoning. So that was something that we could have done that we chose not to do. What?
We were trying to set priorities here, and I don't recall us ever polling the public on inclusionary zoning.
The public consultation that was out in the lobby here, one of the items was inclusionary zoning. And the overwhelming majority of people that responded wanted inclusionary zoning.
Got it. You said the public, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, sorry, the public that participated in the public consultation. There's other cities that put higher percentage of bonus density money to their housing affordability funds. We chose approximately 10%, and we're going to have amazing parks, and we're going to have amazing fields. Yeah. We're going to have great roads, and we're not going to have any lower income people living in our community to act as employees in our
grocery stores and our liquor stores, all that sort of thing. We're losing refugees, we're losing seniors, we're losing employees. So, well, hey, why are you cutting me off when everybody else went on and on about the issue?
Well, not everybody did. I didn't cut anybody off.
Well, you're starting to try to cut me off.
No, I'm just trying to suggest that on a point of order, if I could then, we really...
This is our only item. So it's not like we're struggling for time here. And everybody else had a time to talk about what they felt.
No, I mean, everybody else did.
And the chair will undoubtedly, I'm just making, I mean, if we could, try to focus it on the setting of priorities.
Well, most other people didn't, so why are you forcing me to?
Well,
No, he's not.
I'm not forcing
I think
Why are you asking me?
He's making an observation that I tried to make was that it seems like everybody wants to have this discussion. It's probably more appropriate to have this in the context of the affordable housing strategy, but that's not coming to the end of the year. And I had suggested, seeing as everybody has points of view they want to talk about as an important issue, that's a more appropriate place to have this discussion. But that we can't really bump that up in the work plan. I suggested, because this is a priority setting up exercise right now, that could we reprioritize that discussion and just move it ahead. But Mr. Steblin said that really doesn't affect moving it ahead a month, doesn't really make a difference. So we got a choice. We either discuss it now because everybody is, or we leave it to the end of the year and have it as, which we undoubtedly we will have this discussion again in a better context.
And Mr. Chair, if I could, so there is a third alternative, and that is when the staff that are responsible for our housing policy are in the room, we could have this discussion, or we could do it again when they're here.
Do it at workshop.
But right now, they're not here because this is something about the business plan. Priorities, and so I just worry that we're all going to do this, and then we're going to bring the appropriate staff in, and then we'll have a discussion that's perhaps a little bit more informed, and it might be more appropriate to do it then. And I'd be fine with having a discussion sped up. Let's have one in later in June or one of our meetings in July. But I just. That's all.
I'm just responding to what others said, though. But I'm just responding.
I know.
I'm not bringing up anything new. I'm responding to what others have said.
You're the first person to mention inclusionary zone.
Well, because people are saying we can't do anything. We're doing everything we can. Our hands are tied.
I think...
Not our mandate.
I don't think anyone's...
I think
that a million times.
I said that.
I've told you a million times, don't exaggerate.
So you're right. We don't have all the right staff here. I sense a need to have this discussion. I'm just not sure that this is under the context of priority plan or plan setting is the place to have it.
Humor me for 2 minutes and I'll shut up. Okay? Because everybody else had a chance.
I agree. I agree. That's why I was letting you go.
I'm just responding to what others had said.
And I did allow everybody else to do it.
I've made a point to go to as many UDI meetings and lunches as I can, so I can talk to developers. I golfed in the Coquitlam Classic tournament, so I could talk to developers and talk about affordable housing. And they are making so much money right now. They are holding back projects because they only know that the prices are going to go higher. Our own planning and architectural consultant said we need to push harder on the developers. And so we can do that by demanding more. Okay? And the rental, when we're getting purpose-built rental housing, that's great. Let's really work harder to partner with some nonprofits, BC Housing, and use some of our own bonus density money to subsidize the cost of the construction of some of those units so that we have subsidized units, right? Like it's not magic. It's very simple, right? So there's lots that we can do. We're starting to do some of it. We're not. All of this stuff takes a long time, and cities take a long time to change policies, and I totally get all that. But let's stop saying we're doing all we can, because there is a lot more that we can do. And as times change, I think we need to revisit our decisions and decide whether or not we need to change some of those decisions. Right? That's all I'm trying to say.
Okay. Thank you. I didn't cut you off, but I'm trying to just bring us back to the discussion. Okay, last person I have on the list is Councillor Cirillo.
So can I say, a great discussion, incredible discussion, and I thank everyone for that. I'm just reading something here that diversity is a crucial component of group creativity, and that it's really about not having everybody thinking the same, but everybody bringing their backgrounds and different thoughts. So I just think it's an amazing, amazing discussion. Thank you. Some comments. A housing affordability document, I assume it to be a living document, just like every other document we make that we say is living. So with all of the changing external environment right now, I'm sure there will be a big discussion about that. Mayor Stewart talked about the fire hazard of older buildings, and I just wanted to clarify, maybe this is for Mr. Dumont, are the purpose-built rental housings in the city, no matter their age, not visited regularly by fire prevention? Because they're not a proactive approach to fire prevention. Or are these buildings just left to be fire traps for renters? You said it, Mayor Stewart. You said that you basically tried to insinuate that everybody that's in an old place
let's get comment from the deputy manager.
Point of order. I didn't say that the fire department isn't doing a good job.
I didn't say you did. I want to know, are they proactively doing fire prevention?
Of course they are. It's required by law.
They don't necessarily know there is a
Yes,
suite.
fire prevention does, or the fire department does actively do fire prevention, and they are looking at, and it's on the business plan priorities to do some fire prevention education with residential homes.
I just wanted to make sure that people that might be watching this, the 4 people that are watching, know that no matter how old your apartment building is, purpose-built rental, it is being proactively monitored by the fire department. Good points by Mayor Reid that suites are not necessarily as fire safe.
That's right.
And I wanted to share with you that I am aware of a parent right now with a special need child who is in a suite with no window in the bedroom. Again, they're in a position where they have no choice at this point.
And that's totally illegal.
The other thing that Councillor Reid said that I think is an absolutely amazing idea is an idea of a task force to address rentals. We did one for Brunette Interchange. I did read today that New Westminster is going into this area. Perhaps we could strike a task force, Tri-Cities, and then New Westminster, Pitt Meadows, and Maple Ridge. I would love to be on it as a city councillor to just sit down and brainstorm ideas about addressing rentals. And if that's something I would like to make a motion today that we strike a task force, or at least invite a task force. But the other thing is, to Councillor Reid's point, how about an invitation to our MLAs to come and speak to us about rentals? Could we do that? Could we invite our MLAs to come out and talk to us about if there's changes that need to be done, at least we can introduce them to the issues that are happening around our table.
Let's find out who they're going to be.
Two asks. Could we strike a task force, and could we invite the MLAs?
Okay.
You refer this to a meeting where the appropriate staff are here?
Yeah, I was going to say, this is really out of... Mr. Dumont.
Thank you. I think this goes back to the the housing affordability strategy, and staff is going to report out, and council is free to add additional work items if you want. A task force like that would be I would think a significant work item that would have to be supported by us if we're putting it forward. So I think that's part of the bigger discussion about what council wants to do moving forward with the housing affordability strategy. As Councillor Zarello said, it is a living document, and I'm assuming that when Jim reports out towards the end of the year, there will be additional initiatives other than those 9 items that they're working on now that council will want to do. So I think, to the mayor's point, you do need a bigger discussion around what those priorities will be and how you want to move that program forward. But I don't know that now is the time to be trying to do that.
Yeah, and that may very well be a good recommendation that come from that. I'd also like to know how that would mesh with the existing group that's already there, which is I think that Councillor Towner sits on the housing task force. We have the task force now, so I think we'd have to look at the terms of reference there. So I think it's an interesting idea, but I think again it has to be held in the context with that. But that's just my
How about inviting the
opinion.
MLAs? Could
And
we
you know
do
what?
one thing?
Just to say, and I was going to suggest just on that comment. That's probably a good idea for a general discussion on a whole lot of issues, but they should probably wait until they all get settled in, and that maybe that's a good idea to have in general. But that's just me speaking, not the chair. I got Councillor Reid.
Okay, the people who can solve the most issues with the housing situation in British Columbia is the provincial government. The feds can kick in money and tax things and all that stuff. But the provincial government has the most power to do something about the whole overlying issue. And until we find out who's in for how long, and who's in charge, we might as well just hang out.
Go to text.
and wait for a while. And we're here now at the end of June. I think we should let staff go on as they are and get a list of stuff that we want to see the province do. I, for one, would like to see the whole rentalsman thing re-looked at. And if there's tax incentives available to developers to build rental housing, but not to be at market rentals, because market rentals aren't helping anybody. Somebody who's washing dishes can't afford market rentals. So then we're back into subsidized housing. And so then it's a whole different ballgame. So I think we just put this on hold for a couple of months and see where we end up.
Okay.
Sorry, but...
Okay, thanks.
I totally agree with you.
Okay. I think we're just going to move, well...
It's fine, let's not do anything.
No, just a second. Mayor Stewart.
I will commit we'll by email try to set up a workshop or something, a 4-hour session, whether it's the Wednesday, Thursday sort of thing with appropriate staff in the room as quickly as we can do it, because this is, Councillor Zerlo's right, and many of you have expressed the same thing, that this is our most pressing issue that affects our residents right now, is the challenges associated with the rental market. I disagree that building more market rental won't solve the problem. I think that's the only thing we can do, is build more market rental and build more non-market because of the gaps in the market. We have to get to about 200,000 market rental units in this region built in the next few years, and that's going to require a concerted effort with all levels of government. But bringing together, I know there's passions around, and I agree that the diversity is the key to make sure that the diverse opinions are all shared, that staff are there, because when we have that discussion, because it's going to be feedback back and forth of things we can do, things we can't do, and in the end, we should generate all our efforts at trying to solve the housing problem, not trying to figure out how to do it today, because today is a business plan priorities session, and I do passionately believe that this has to be dealt with appropriately and quickly, and I will commit to doing that.
Okay, do we need to, Councillor Tanner.
I haven't spoken. I just want to say a really quick thing. One thing that we can do that I hope that we're doing, my neighborhood, the big huge houses, I go to open houses, there's 2 impermissible suites in some houses, like the unit, and then it's 3 suites, or the house and then 2 suites. I don't want families or single moms to move in there and then it gets reported and then they have to find somewhere to live, because there's no vacancy. Even if someone wants to move out, a teenager, a young adult, there's no rental. So I'm really hoping that we're upping. The realtors that I have chatted with don't seem to, we say we've written letters to the real estate board. I don't think they get it, because they're talking verbally in these open houses about the house having multiple suites. They don't seem to understand. So my concern is I don't want families to move in, get settled, get into the school, get used to the bus route, and then have to be evicted because we catch them. So that is something I'm hoping that we're doing. Anyways, thank you.
Move receipt of the report.
Second?
Okay, so just before we move to that, just to follow up on what Mayor Stewart was suggesting, which is to either to refer the rental part of this discussion to either a strategic planning meeting or
strategic priorities meeting, or and it's not just the rental components. There's lots of discussion here about the for sale market, the housing choices stuff, all of that. It's an enormously complex issue, and there's lots that we can do. This last one, for example, how do you, if you do enforce against the tertiary suite, the second or third suite, the only one that gets penalized really in the long term is the tenant.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had just chats with legal about whether the fine could be $100 a day, but only enforce the fine if the landlord is still charging rent during that 2-month period where they're being evicted. If the rent disappears for 2 months, then so does an element of the fining. So there's all kinds of those kinds of issues that we have to grapple with. And we have to do it quickly because we're having these houses built with multiple suites.
Okay, so I'm fine with that. The recommendations before us to receive the report. Was it moved? I can see some moved and seconded. Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant.
We have that. Quiet. Motion to adjourn. Made by Councillor Marsden, seconded by Councillor Espenson. All in favor? Okay, we're adjourned. Come back at 10.
Thank you, Bruce, for stepping in.